Hello, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you to today's Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm the digital editor here at Alta Journal, and I am amped for today's discussion with author Doug Peacock on his article for Alta, Let's Drain Lake Powell. Wow, this article has really struck a chord with readers new and old. It is blown up over a holiday weekend, and we are delighted that so many of you are so interested in this topic and hearing what Doug has to say. I know we are excited to get this conversation going. Before we do, some background on our guest, Doug Peacock, whose body of work could take up an entire episode of Alta Live on its own, which I will secretly talk him into booking later. Author, disabled veteran, filmmaker, and naturalist, Doug is the founder and president of Save the Yellowstone Grizzly. He was a Green Beret medic in Vietnam and the real-life model for Edward Abbey's George Washington Hayduke in the Monkey Wrench Gang. His books include Grizzly Years, In Search of the American Wilderness, Baja, Walking It Off, A Veteran's Chronicle of War and Wilderness, and The Essential Grizzly, The Mingled Fates of Men and Bears, which he co-authored with Andrea Peacock. His latest book, Was It Worth It? A Wilderness Warrior's Long Trail Home, won the 2022 Outdoor National Book Award and a 2022 Award for Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Doug will be in conversation with Alta newsletter Matt Haber, a nationally published author, one of my favorite colleagues, who is excited to speak with Doug today about Lake Powell, the Colorado River, and more. So get excited for that. I see people letting us know where they're zooming in from in the chat. That is so great. Hey to Alaska and Phoenix. Keep that up. Again, before I turn this over to Matt and Doug, a pitch for Alta Journal. Alta Journal is an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. If you like the kind of content we publish, including articles like Doug's, I do hope you'll check us out at altaonline.com. Consider an annual membership for $50 a year. You get, I think right now, a hat, a bookstore guide, as well as 4 issues of our beautiful magazine. We also, Costa Rica, wow, hi. We also host weekly events like this, Alta Live, as well as the California Book Club, a monthly series with an interview with an author, a California author, about kind of a seminal California piece of work. So again, I so hope you'll check us out and consider supporting us with a membership. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen here. Ask your questions for Doug, and we'll get to those at the end of Matt and Doug's half-hour conversation. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com. We're also going to send you an email with a link to the interview, a link to Doug's article, where you can buy his books, and anything else that pops up in today's conversation. So I am in Novato, California. Hi, Texas. Hi, Rockford, Illinois. It's so great to see all of you. With that, I turn it over to my colleague, Matt.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Doug, for being here. I feel like without any kind of lead up, we should just get right into your damn article. So tell me about Lake Powell and your thoughts about what should be done.
Yeah, well, I inherited Lake Powell basically from Ed Abbey, who, a long time ago wrote the Monkey Wrench Gang, and Hayduke Lives was scribbled on the back walls of bathrooms throughout the Mountain West, and it's not necessarily a flattering thing in that Ed's character was sort of a dolt, but Ed and I solved that in 1975. Lippincott, his publisher, the lawyers made him write this really embarrassing letter. And I was in Moab later that summer after chasing grizzlies full time in Yellowstone and Glacier. And, I went over and it caused a little, it wasn't a big deal, but, we had to get through it. So we took this embarrassing letter, with all the spit dribbling, lawyer-like, things. Well, they should only consider the good parts of, Hayduke and bullshit like that. But nonetheless, Ed and I took it up Mill Creek, which is a wild canyon that ends up in Moab, and took it out to the junction of these the forks of the river, where there is a great big boulder with petroglyphs on it. And the petroglyphs are kind of a map of the area. It's really interesting. Anyway, we ceremonially burned that letter, and we never spoke to the monkey of Hayduke again.
But tell me about his thoughts about the dam and the damage it had done to the environment and to the natural water supply, and you kind of picking up the mantle on that 50 years later.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's my ancient debts to Ed, and Christ, I buried Ed way back in '89, so that's a long time, and but Ed Abbey, his original statement that I quoted was, all dams are ugly, but the Glen Canyon Dam is sinful ugly, and that nails it. And I couldn't help but be a partisan in this. It was largely a ceremonial fight for the 50 years, between the Monkey Wrench gang and now, and because we just thought it was a fantasy, blow up the dam, drain the lake, and
And doing that would do what for the downstream? If we took out the dam, how would that impact people downstream positively, I would hope?
Yeah, well, they'd have to ration it out, they'd have to, they have all the engineering in the world. We don't lack any of that. If anything, we've got a little too much dependence on engineering, because it's not going to bail us out of this, at least 20-year mega drought. And it's not going to bail us out of the cause of the mega drought, which is climate change or global warming or whatever you want to nail on it. And it strikes me as, we need to take a little longer view in looking at the parceling out of groundwaters and our available water, fresh water. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the cause of all that is truly climate change. And we have to take the opposite view of that. We can't wait a damn day without it's not going to come at the end of the century, man. It's already here, and it's going to get worse. And that's you and me and my children and granddaughter, the whole 9 yards.
I think a lot of us are coming into awareness about climate change or the destruction of wilderness, but you learned it firsthand. You spent a lot of time living in the wilderness. So tell us a little bit about that your experience as a fire watcher and your closeness with the grizzlies.
Well, for instance, I live in the mountains between the Absarokas and the Gallatin Range. Yellowstone is about 30 miles behind me, and I'm in occupied grizzly country, so I pay attention to, I first hung out with grizzly bears the same year that I met Ed Abbey in 1968.
I love that you call them grizzly bears like they're your friends.
Yeah, and I never got over it. But the grizzly bears in Yellowstone, for instance, their most important food was the nut of a stone pine called white bark pine. And, it's like a pine nut. It's a nutritious, delicious pine nut. And it is, the white bark pine is a high altitude pine. It's pretty close to the timberline. And, and it's, they've done a lot of studies on it, and, mothers that fed on pine nuts, they had, better cub survival and better nutrition and survival rates. So, it was crucially important. And starting in 2002, and that's when the mega drought pretty much got noticed. I wouldn't say it started, and it started way before then, but it got noticed. And up here in the Rockies, the winter temperatures at night in Yellowstone started to rise. because it turns out there's an endemic parasite, the mountain pine beetle, that kills white bark pine trees while drilling into the cambium and eventually girdling the tree. Well, what kept them out of the white bark pine is they were so high, they would get 35 below zero for 3 or 4 days in a row in the wintertime, and that would kill all the pine
Mhm.
bark beetles in the bark.
So
And
we
when
make it warm, they can thrive.
they got it warm and they started to overwinter. And in 5 years, I don't take a weatherman. You could just drive around Yellowstone and look at the tops of the mountains, and they were all red from dead white bark pine. I mean, every range. It was amazing. And that was their first really blatant, idiot-proof view of climate change. The tops of the mountains are red.
Mhm. I think what's interesting is that you see it from the whole ecosystem. You're thinking about the little tiny bugs, the trees, the bears, and then also the humans. How can we help other people see it in such a kind of 360 way to understand how important this is to solve some of these problems?
Truly, I believe that, the chances of the grizzly bear for long time survival and Homo sapiens are the same, and we are all in this together. And this is terrifying stuff. And you've just, there's so much sticking your head in the sand on this one by everybody. And it was nobody's fault because it was everybody's job.
Mhm.
And the scientists mitigated, the effects and pulled their punches, and so did the press. And here it is. And it's Homo sapiens on this earth, they've been around for a while. And the hottest temperature we've ever experienced is 3.3 degrees centigrade above normal, so we're about halfway there now.
We're creeping up.
We're creeping up, but nothing survives without its habitat. And our genesis was evolved in habitats pre-agricultural, pre-village, and habitats that today would be considered wilderness.
Mhm.
And, I have considered that my battles, since the earliest days before I even met Ed Abbey. And Ed Abbey and I, the one thing we had in common, because we fought. I mean, it would squabble. He was a
Well, he did have a reputation for being a bit of a crusty old guy.
I ain't no shining saint either. So we shared that one.
Grumpy old man.
It was our shared value, recognition of the value of wilderness and the need to defend it that just carried through.
So short of doing some of the things that were recommended in the Monkey Wrench Gang, what can we do to actually make some improvements? I don't know that we're all going to go the route of disruptive eco-terrorism.
No, I know that, but you've got to quit feeding off fossil fuels.
Mhm.
I mean, that is the one thing that's taken us down. And the gas and oil energy, the energy, they're spending a lot of money on keeping us going. And so are, places like Saudi Arabia. They spend a lot of money just keeping us burning deadly gases.
And they're going for the water too, right? I mean, they're aware of the water.
Yeah, I would eventually, what the water, it means everybody's got to get by with less, and that's going to be so hard to do. I know it's going to be squabbling, but for instance, since about 80% of our fresh water it goes into agriculture, we got to make big changes there. And now in Saudi Arabia, because we export, Saudi Arabia owns a great aquifer in Arizona, that Bishop Valley, what is Butler Valley, that's it. It's close to where I winter, so I know it well. And in 2015, this State Land Bureau of Arizona gave them almost free leases for, a whole valley with an aquifer under it. And of course, Saudi Arabia had it, and local water managers considered that a fraudulent deal, a criminal deal. And, somebody should look into the Arizona State Land Bureau, because they just gave it away.
Do you think deals like that are out of short-sightedness or out of greed? Like, how do these things happen? I know that there's a lot of big business interests, but like, it seems like somebody would put their hand up and say, please don't sell this huge aquifer that we need.
They didn't. The State Land Bureau got away with it. They were quiet. They have never said a word about, what Saudi Arabia does or how much water it uses. Not a word. And, so that they grow all this, Saudi Arabia owns this valley, okay?
Right.
Because
And they grow alfalfa, you said, right?
Saudi Arabia to feed cows. Now, in Saudi Arabia, there's one good lesson there. It's illegal to grow alfalfa in Saudi Arabia because it uses too much water.
Mhm.
And, we're going to have to look at that ourselves.
Yeah.
If you do one thing to start with, quit growing alfalfa.
Are there other steps that individuals can take, you think?
Sure. We can always get by with less. We can't give it away, and we can't afford to let anybody, and it's the states largely now that are tapping into fossil groundwater. And that fossil groundwater is, the big ones in the Southwest, in the Colorado River area, are at least 10,000 years old. And we just started, with the great gas and oil exploration of the last, 100 years plus. They found a lot of these giant aquifers, often, in desert valleys, surrounded by mountains. And, the aquifer.
Right. It's like almost fracking for water in a way.
Yeah. And it's, but that's all there is for everybody, ever. That which rains on us and we're able to collect in our natural drainages, and, those reserves, I think they should be reserved for, we have children and grandchildren, and they're going to need something too.
So it's easy to get kind of hopeless looking at the headlines or seeing photos, aerial photos of some of the terrain. Is there anything that gives you hope, or any groups that you can point to that people can support or look to as guides for us? I want to try to find some small bright light here.
I've always been optimistic.
I hope so.
Yeah, but what is called for is action by everybody. And if you do nothing else, look at your own backyard, and there's so much to be done there. Get out and take stock of it and figure out something to do. And if you can't find a job in your backyard, come up here and help save Grizz for me,
Yeah.
But
Well, tell us about that.
full-time.
People are embracing the national parks and they are going to these parks in record numbers, but there's actually kind of a negative effect of that, right?
Yeah, the bears don't need us, especially the roadside bears. And they're there not because there's too many bears, but because the other habitats are taken up. And you tend to find often subadult grizzlies and grizzly families with cubs, sort of lower on the grizzly bear hierarchy, because they do form a hierarchy, using the road size. And these poor animals are harassed by, I just see pictures. I can't
Right.
go bear it anymore.
If you're close enough to take a picture, you are too close.
Yeah. And, I filmed grizzlies for 20 years, but I never filmed them from the roads ever or around another human being.
Well, I watched the documentary about you, Peacock's War, and I was
was
aware
crazy.
of how much distance you kept. Yeah, you were real young then.
all the way in there,
But you kept a great deal of distance from them, and you were very aware that if they caught whiff of you or sound of you, you hid and got out of their sight lines. I don't know that people are that aware now.
No, they aren't, and they're not educated on all that stuff. But that's part of what I'm trying to do. I'm producing another movie. It's almost done on the return of the
Peacock
grizzly.
Second War.
No, it's not Peacock. I stayed out of this one.
Okay.
Maybe not totally, but a little.
So
Mostly.
tell us about your film that you're working on.
Well, the one we finished was The Beast of Our Time, which was an award winner. Finished it 2 years ago, and it's about climate change and grizzly bears. The biggest threat to grizzly bears, like ourselves, is climate change, and it's causing vegetative changes in the parks and things. But more of all, it's changing everything. So the grizzly bears in secure areas like Yellowstone are having to move out and look for new habitats.
And people are moving closer and closer to those habitats, so the bears are coming closer to them.
The states couldn't be worse on grizzly bears. Alaska just closed a very brief aerial hunting of grizzly bears. They killed 93 grizzly bears from the air, including mothers and cubs. And if Montana got control over management of grizzly bears, it doesn't now because the grizzly is still listed as threatened on the Endangered Species Act. Our governor would authorize, like he did for wolves, aerial hunting, and we'd be blowing away grizz. And I'm also involved in a lawsuit because they killed a harmless grizzly bear family over east of Jackson Hole in Teutonia, Idaho. That was a family that came from right across the river from me. I look out this way and there's nothing out here. You can't see a damn thing. There's 400 elk in the wintertime and lots of antelope and an occasional wolf. But what the hell was I talking about?
We were talking about if Montana got changed those laws, you'd see shooters and helicopters.
The states of Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana want to delist the grizzly immediately, which means taking it off the endangered species list. That's the one thing they will fight to the death on, all the way. And we're actually suing the government over the death of those Teutonia people. The Federal Wildlife Service for authorizing the killing of a mother and a cub, and the state of Idaho for killing the last cub without permission from anybody. Technically, the feds have to authorize the so-called take, which means killing of a
right. Nice euphemism there. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, let's segue. This is all very fascinating, but I want to also talk a little bit about the cultural stuff, which is, you have a claim to fame that very few people have. You were the inspiration for a folk hero. You might be a little ambivalent about that, but I remember the name George Hayduke when I was a kid. There were all those books attributed to George Hayduke about getting even and getting revenge. What is that like to have this kind of literary doppelganger living out there in people's imaginations?
Well, by the time the Monkey Wrench Gang was published, I had started my own full-time work with Grizzly Bears. I was a defender of grizzly, and I had this growing archive of wild footage that nobody else had. So I could bargain my way on, NBC Nightly News or Good Morning America and crap like that, and get some publicity.
Use the fame that came from the book to talk about your topic.
What I'm saying is, fortunately, probably, my full-time work with Grizz and George Washington Hayduke surfaced, at about the same time. And, and George Hayduke, like I said, was adult. I don't think I'm quite adult. And I started writing my own book. So, Grizzly Years was the first one. I started that in a fire lookout in Glacier Park, which is how I kind of survived for over a decade. I had very low level jobs for the for the Department of Interior, the National Park Service,
And we should say you sought out some of these jobs to help you deal with some of the trauma that you experienced and the things that you had saw in Vietnam.
Well, not the job per se, but the wilderness was,
Yeah.
was
It seemed
more,
like a very quiet, contemplative life
yeah.
while you were there.
Well, I had the lowest jobs in the world. I was a backcountry ranger in North Carolina. I was a terrible ranger. I never busted anything but a Winnebago for illegal parking in my 3-year tenure. And then
You missed your quotas by a mile.
Yeah, and then I came down the GS level and I went to Glacier and became a fire lookout. And when I got down to GS 0, I retired forever, and to the
Yeah.
great relief of the Department of Interior.
But it produced some great books.
Yeah, and I was working around them, I was, I filmed in the spring and the fall and on the weekends or whenever I could, sneak out of the lookout.
And you weren't completely alone. I saw in the documentary you had a family up there, which was probably
yeah.
nice and quiet.
Well, the lookout's livable, but when I'm filming grizzlies, I was carrying everything and sleeping in a tent and questioning, and listen for the rustling in the brush.
I mean, the experiences that you've had, like, I feel like there's very few people who can claim to have these kind of firsthand experiences with animals, with nature. It's really amazing. I mean, do you ever think about that? Just the breadth of your life and how many places you've been and seen?
No, I'm drawn out apparently by these big apex carnivores. I like tigers, I like jaguars, I like polar bears, and especially grizzly bears. And,
Yeah.
I've sought them out all my life without thinking about it much. And, that just gives you, it gives you a little more space for looking around yourself carefully and not centering yourself in everything you have.
Well, I think a lot of people might seek that out of a kind of machismo thinking, but you are not like that. You seem like much more of a gentle person.
You can't be too machismo with a
Yeah,
grizzly
with a
bear.
12-foot bear.
Do your ass off.
Nice.
No, I know how to behave around grizzly bears. The most threatening grizzly bears for me or anybody else are mothers with cubs, because you can surprise them at close range. For instance, in the daytime, on warm days like today, and they'll bed out in the middle of days, and they bed in thickets, and they sleep pretty sound. And so you can stumble close to them and get a little closer than you want to.
I think that's good advice all the way down the food chain. Don't come between a mother and her babies.
But if you do, all you need to do, and I'm talking about maybe, 3 or 4 dozen mothers that at least were defensive, that weren't, a couple dozen charged me. All you got to do is not be a threat to their cub. I mean, truly, it's just night and day. I've had grizzly bears charge me and stop, 6 feet away, and one mother leaned forward and appeared to sniff my pant leg. I don't know. And then she turned around and ran away. But I don't do anything. I don't look at the bear. I don't yell. I don't move fast.
Yeah.
Just, you're not a threat to their cubs. And and the truth is that advice to play dead if a bear ever touches you is sound advice. A lot of people have gotten out of it.
That's our takeaway for our audience is don't threaten the babies. If you have to play dead, you should play dead.
Yeah.
And look in your backyard for fixing things. Thanks, Doug. Well, Beth's going to pop back in, our host.
Okay.
And I think she's got some questions from the audience. This has been fantastic. Thank you, Beth. Please bring us some questions.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, Doug. I do have questions from our audience. I'm just going to kind of grab them as we come. Can you, David Baker asks, can you comment on the Glen Canyon Institute's Phil Mead First plan?
What's their plan?
The Phil Mead First plan.
I didn't understand that phrase, but the Glen Canyon, you're talking about Glen Canyon Institute?
Yes.
They do really good work. but I didn't even hear what you said to me, so I don't know.
Apparently they have a plan called the Phil Mead, MEAD
Oh,
first
Phil Mead.
plan.
Yeah, I don't know much about that, you know, I work, I mean, I've founded a half a dozen conservation organizations and, like Run River Conservation Study, and I really have worked hard on them, I was chairman of the board for 25 years there, and we saved wilderness areas, a lot of it in Canada, about 30 million acres. And I'm just saying that I'm very private. I work alone. I'm not very social, and I don't know what other people are doing every day. But Glen Canyon
Very emotionally healthy.
Institute has a great reputation. All my friends like Terry Tempest Williams, I mean, they really speak well of it.
Kirk asked, to what extent do you think the side canyons and their habitats come back if the reservoir is drained? Second part, do you think the area can be resilient enough to return to something as close as it was? And if so, how long might that take?
It's going to take the life of a cottonwood tree, because which is not very long. They grow really fast. Speaking, we're talking about 50 years, but the willows, willow bottoms are already moving in some of those canyons. The willow is regenerating, the animal is coming back, especially in the higher canyons. And, the wonderful archaeological stuff in Glen Canyon, and it's beginning to rise again. The cliff dwellings are, reaching for the sky, and the petroglyphs, the drowned petroglyphs are kind of clawing their way up the slick rock. So I mean, it's delicious. And Glen Canyon is a place, everybody's that loves it has staked it out. They want it to be a national park again. And basically, if we get rid of that dam, we're gonna, we'll have Glen Canyon back in pretty much record time. And I said the only thing lacking might be cottonwood bottomlands, because they take 50 or more years to regenerate, but that's not much in terms of, what we expect. I mean, that's on the other hand, with global warming, we got to watch our timeline here. We can't be too lax about anything. We can't say, well, by the end of the century, because I might not be here. I mean, I certainly won't be here, but more figuratively speaking, we might.
Donald Scott asks, first of all, he thanks you for your lifetime of Earth gifts. Budgets are statements of values. How can we hope to solve these problems, in your opinion, when both parties, I assume he's referring to Democrat and Republican, seem to have no concern for public lands? They raised an already obscene military budget of $90 billion, but did not increase the NPS budget from its shameful $3.8 billion, nor Bureau of Land Management's pitiful $1.78 billion budget. What are your ideas?
Well, I agree with that, but the looming values that have gotten us down into these troubled waters to begin with, human greed and corporate greed, and the quantifying of water. The Chicago Mercantile, and I think just 2020 or 21, made owning water a future, and so you could buy and speculate in water and own it as property and sell it for a profit. That's really the same values that got us down here to begin with. That, I mean, the endless consumption on a finite planet is a plan that will not work. It'll bite you on the ass sooner or later, and it's biting us on the ass right now with our changes to the climate and the weather. So I think it's real fundamental. I know we've got movies that say greed is good, but it's not good for the planet. And everybody wants a piece of this action, and we can't have it. We're all going to have to, and it's going to be terrible to say, everybody is going to lose out on this water, but I think, you know, you have to do it as equally as possible to everybody, everything, every corporation, every farm, every corporate ranch, every foreign commodity. And, you know, it's our agriculture just uses so much water in the Southwest, and we can't keep doing it with crops like alfalfa and cotton. You know, it's just not sustainable in any way.
Mitch Dorsk, a hydrogeologist from Western Colorado, says he agrees biodiversity will quickly return to Glen Canyon if and when we destroy the dam. Yet he's curious on your opinion how the sediments will have accumulated at the bottom of the reservoir, and how that will impact the area once it's uncovered.
Well, that's as much his job as mine, because we do have the knowledge, we have the engineering, and those sediments, there's a lot of sediment down there. And, you know, if it were to gush out, that would be trouble. So they're going to have to find a way to take that sucker down and, you know, ration out the sediments. And I don't quite know how it's done. I'm not an engineer. You know, I like to, in the old days, I like to blow things up, but
We lost you at the end there, Doug.
oh, well, I just said,
He was just incriminating himself for destructive acts from 50 years ago.
Like blowing
I
stuff
said,
up.
in the old days, I was pretty good at explosives. I was cross-trained in Vietnam and demo, and so, but not for a long time, dear.
Fair enough. We're going over. Let's just do one more question, because I'm wondering about this too. What's happening with the lawsuit regarding the Grizzly family that was shot near your home? Do you have any updates? What's the plan?
Well, you know, I wrote an article for Todd Wilkinson's, I don't remember what he calls it. Anyway, I wrote an article, and one of my friends at a big outdoor company saw it and called me up and wondered if I needed legal help. And so I connected with their, you know, law firm, and they put up enough money that, I mean, and, you know, they put up enough money that we were able to hire a law firm and sue them in court. And right now we're going through the stages. We filed a long time ago, we filed our intent to sue, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, we've already had a talk with the head of the interagency Grizzly Bear team. And, you know, it's slow, and they'll drag you out as long as possible. We may not get into federal court until later this year. I mean, but that's what's doing. All the legal papers are filed, and, you know, I submitted a what the hell do they call them anyway? You know, something that tells you've got a vested interest in bears, you know about bears, and you're willing to testify and stuff like that. And I knew that bear family because it was first seen right across the river from me, and it moved. You know, I live, you know, way up the Yellowstone River, and that bear family moved to Gardner, which is right on the border of Yellowstone. Then Montana moved them over to West Yellowstone. They wandered south to Teutonia, and Idaho Fish and Game killed them. And that family never did anything. It never threatened human beings, and it didn't cause any property damage whatsoever. It didn't get into garbage, and they just killed them. And, you know, that there's lots of other dead bears I could go after, but we needed a tangible one, and this was very recent. And the conditions under which they were murdered are inexcusable and illegal.
I do have to ask, in our last issue of Alta, we had an article about the possibility of reintroducing the grizzly bear to California. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I wrote an article about that about 30 years ago for that, the Cal Academy of Sciences. And, you know, it's all up to human tolerance. If they can string that together, you know, one ranch next to whatever is up there because it's so populated, you know, grizzly bears can live in low densities of human beings quite well. You know, they've done so in Europe, you know, in Italy. There's few in France and the Pyrenees and Spain, and, you know, and they're in the Slavic countries and the Scandinavian countries. And, you know, in Europe, it's the same species, it's the brown bear. But it's Ursus arctos, and our grizzly bear is just a cantankerous variety of that, you know, more ancient bear, the brown bear of Asia and Europe. And you know, the popular thinking is that when the grizzly bear crossed over the Bering Strait, which they probably did about 70,000 years ago, no exact fossils on that one, but you know, they were stranded up in that stark, treeless periglacial of Alaska with lots of horrible predators that we also live with, like saber-toothed tigers and short-faced bears and the American lion, who is big some bitch, you know, twice as big as an African lion. And, you know, anyway, that was a good offense until they learned to charge, you know, threats and try to, you know, drive things away. Anyway, that's the theory. And what we end up with is the Asian brown bear and the European one. It's just a little more docile. I've lived with them in Siberia and places like that than the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear is just a little cantankerous, which I like.
I see that's not a grizzly bear behind you, but you have a visitor over your shoulder. Who's that?
Oh, that's the cat. I have two big collie dogs in the house too. So, you know, I'll take them out this afternoon, go across river. There's like a, you know, a drive site where the Indians used to drive buffalo over the cliffs, except it's a big terrace there, and they used to drive them into snowbanks. But there's these lines of rocks that go for, you know, like miles. And there you are. You know, I just like it because it's a reminder that people have been there, you know, for 9,000 years at least before you. And, you know, they've always been on the ground, and it's otherwise wild. I like that a lot. So do my dogs.
This is such an inspiring conversation. Thank you so much, Doug Peacock and Matt Haber. So much fun speaking and listening to you talk and seeing our big crowd today. Before you folks leave, I do want to invite you next week. We are going to chat about a decommissioned missile silo in Roswell, New Mexico, that you can spend the night in. It's an Airbnb, but the owner, Gary Baker, will join us and tell us all about his missile silo. And
especially after the climate apocalypse, you could stay there.
well, yeah, and the preppers who like to stay there, people who are preparing for the end of days. So check that out. That's Wednesday, July 12th here at Alta Live. Again, Doug Peacock, such a joy and an honor to have you join Alta Live.
Thanks, Doug.
For Alta. Thanks, guys. Take care, everyone.